Welcome to Multiply Series 7. Do you know, God is a God who restores. So far, we've been looking at the book of Genesis. In week 1 we looked at creation, then we looked at the fall, okay? And you know, there's this pattern that's been emerging through every story we've seen. Let me give you some examples. Essentially, this pattern goes something like this. Mankind, that's me and you, we always end up sinning, okay? And unfortunately, when we sin, there's always a consequence. However, when we look at God's reaction to our sin, what we see is He is a God that is trying to restore. He's trying to bring restoration. What does that mean? Okay, well, restoration means returning something back to its initial state. So just like in Genesis, when we looked at creation, the world was perfect. However, in the fall, it all changed, didn't it? And you know, God is wanting to restore that. So here's examples. In the second week, we looked at Adam and Eve. And they sinned by eating from the tree in the knowledge of good and evil. Their consequence was they were thrown out of the garden. However, God gave them this promise. He says that they were going to crush the head of the serpent. Now that sounds a bit funny, doesn't it? But what he's actually talking about there is when Jesus comes, we're going to see the enemy conquered. Skip forward in Genesis, we're introduced to a guy called Noah. Okay, we all know the story of Noah. Essentially, the world had got into so much sin that God sent the flood. That was the consequence. However, the reason for it was so that he could start the world again with Noah's family. Okay, so what about Abraham? Well, do you know, Abraham is one of the key characters in God's plan for restoration. Just like God made promises to Adam and Eve and Noah, God made promises also to Abraham. Let's open our Bibles and look at a little bit more in detail at some of these promises that God made. So let's look a little bit at the Genesis 15 passage. Here we're learning about covenants. Okay, covenants was what people did back then, and it was like an agreement, it was like a contract between yourself and another person. And you know, they took it so serious that, you know, they did this crazy thing of cutting up an animal, cutting it in two, and both people would walk through it together. Okay, it sounds crazy to me and you, but culturally it was the done thing back then. But essentially, the reason why they did it is they walked through these dead animals to say to each other, yeah, if I come out of this agreement, or if I don't live up to the agreement I've made with you, let me be cursed like this animal. Okay, so pretty serious stuff. They were calling down curses on themselves if they didn't stick to it. Now, what's really interesting about the covenant that God makes with Abraham here is that we read that God puts Abraham to sleep, and then God comes down himself and walks through the animal, but Abraham doesn't. Now, what does that say to you and me? That says that actually when God entered this covenant with Abraham, he's saying that actually the covenant's only on me. It doesn't matter, Abraham, if you manage to live up to this covenant or not, I am going to live up to this. Okay? Pretty amazing thing. Not only just that God came down for a man, but actually that God is willing to take on everything for us. So what then was this covenant relationship with God and this promise really all about? Well, God's plan, as we said at the beginning of the video, is always a plan for restoration. Okay, and we said that Abraham was a key character in this. The reason he was so key is God picked Abraham, along with his wife Sarah, to be people that would have so many children that God would make a nation out of them. He says to Abraham, I will make your descendants greater, or as many as the stars in the sky. Okay, do you know, this covenant relationship and this plan for restoration actually set not just the beginning of the story of the Bible that we've seen continue through the Bible, but actually it still goes on today. Do you know, Abraham's descendants became a nation called Israel. That's something you've probably heard of, and we see that continue right through, and they become a Jewish nation, which we see in the New Testament as well. And I don't know if you guys remember, but in week 1 of looking at the Old Testament, what we said was, as we're made in the image of God, part of our responsibility is to show what God looks like to the world. So far, everybody had been messing up in this, and this is why God is starting it again with Abraham, that he would have one people group that would look different to the rest of the people in the world. And the way they would look different is that they would have this covenant relationship with God where they stay close to him, spend time with him, hear his word, and then act in a way that people can see God reflected in them. Unfortunately, Israel and the Jews and all these people didn't manage to live up to the covenant that God had given them. And you know, this is where Jesus comes on the scene in the New Testament, and that's also referred to as the New Covenant. But we'll come to that later on in the series. Now, we are still part of this story of God's people that are chosen to show God to the world. That's something that we're part of. And now that Jesus has come and made this possible for not only Abraham and Israel to be in relationship with God, when Jesus came, now everybody who wants to be in relationship with God can be. And it's again our role and responsibility to be a group of people that show God to the world. That is continuing. So God's plan for restoration is an ongoing one. And what a privilege it is for me and you to be able to look back all the way through history to someone like Abraham and then join up the journey right through Scripture to today.